Alright, so just when everyone thought that Comic-Con was over yesterday, Kevin Feige came out on stage and blew the audience's collective minds in Hall H when he not only announced the entire Phase 4 of the MCU, but on top of that, the beginning of Phase 5. Thor: Love and Thunder is based on Jason Aaron's Mighty Thor run, which is one of my favorite comics of all time, and on top of that, we've got a Hawkeye series featuring Katie Bishop, and it's inspired by Matt Fraction's run. That's perfect. I'm so excited about that. And then we got Doctor Strange in the mouth of in the multiverse of madness, not in the mouth of madness. It's totally inspired by that though. It felt like Kevin Feige was just announcing stuff that was specifically made for me. But then at the end of the panel, he threw down an announcement that absolutely floored everyone who saw it. We are getting a brand new Blade reboot starring Mahershala Ali, and it's coming at the beginning or the middle of Phase 5. Everyone's favorite half-pyre is finally getting the Marvel Studios treatment he deserves, and honestly, it kind of seems like it could be too good to be true, and that's because it might be. Alright, now that I got your attention with that flashy intro, I honestly couldn't be more excited to have a new Blade movie coming down the road. With announcement after announcement being thrown down yesterday, it was kind of getting a little hard to keep up, but the key takeaway for me is that now that Marvel has all of their key Avengers kind of off the chessboard, they can start to explore the weirder side of their multiverse, and that includes horror, and they're not wasting any time doing so. For example, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is being called the MCU's first horror movie. It's an adventure featuring both Doctor Strange and Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch. And of course, it's directed by Scott Derrickson, the guy behind Sinister, so I'd expect to see some pretty scary stuff in it. They have a ton of stories they could pull from there, but personally, I think they should unleash every monster the Marvel Multiverse has to offer in an Annabelle Comes Home style Halloween movie. Like, this movie needs to be set on Halloween. But anyway, after that, we're getting Blade, which is a story that centers on a half-human, half-vampire who uses his powers and his ability to walk around during the day to hunt down other vampires. It's a really cool setup. Of course, because he's a vampire hunter, he uses wooden stakes, but he also uses katanas, he uses other swords, he uses guns. Like, at one point he loses one of his arms and then turns it into a stake, and then he turns that into a machine gun arm. Like, he uses a lot of different weapons, and all of them are pretty badass. The point there is that he's in a different class of heroes than we've ever seen in the MCU. I'd file him under the same category as someone like Wolverine or the Punisher or even Deadpool instead of someone like Captain America. Naturally, pretty much every Blade fan out there is expecting a movie with him as the title character to be rated R, and that makes sense because he's a vampire hunter, and if you've read any of his comics, they do get pretty gory. And that's where the problem here lies. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but because Marvel Studios is handling this movie and it's falling under the MCU banner, that pretty much guarantees it's going to be rated PG-13. Honestly, at this point, I'm not getting really too worked up over it because in my mind, there was never really a chance of an R-rated movie falling under the MCU banner, but I can see why the knee-jerk reaction for so many people, myself included, was disappointment. Growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, if you saw a PG-13 horror movie coming out, that was pretty much a guarantee that it would suck. But as we entered the tail end of the early 2000s and made our way into the 2010s and 2010s, we started to get stuff like Insidious and Drag Me to Hell and The Ring and just awesome PG-13 horror movies that were still scary. So yeah, while it is tougher to make an effective PG-13 horror movie, it's definitely not impossible like it seemed like it was back in the 90s. But yeah, the internet being the internet and fandom being what it is in 2019, people are obviously pretty pissed about the idea of having a PG-13 Blade movie to the point where they're kind of in denial. The movies I keep seeing people point to as examples of their argument are Fox's Deadpool and Logan, which are both incredible R-rated movies. I love them both. Of course, both of those movies were made by 20th Century Fox, but Disney did just buy 20th Century Fox, so what's stopping them from bringing them under the MCU banner? The answer to that is, however, pretty simple. So while the MCU has explored adult themes in the past and actually shown us some pretty dark stuff and made their audiences ask themselves some tough questions, the key audience Disney is trying to reach with MCU movies is kids. That's because the market of kids is extremely lucrative. Obviously, they don't have their own money, but they get their parents to take them to see a movie, which means 2 ticket sales, and they also have this innate ability to watch movies countless times. They'll beg their parents to take them to see MCU movies more than once, and then of course they'll go to the store, they'll buy video games, they'll buy toys, action figures, Lego sets, all based on MCU movies. There's a ton of money to be made there, and Disney knows that. That's why they let Sony take all the money from the Spider-Man movies while they just take all the money from the merchandise. That's where the real money is. And guys, I'm not denying that I've spent money on a ton of MCU related merchandise. Like I have a ton of t-shirts, I just bought Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 and I'm absolutely loving it, but the point here is the chance of Marvel doing an R-rated MCU movie is like virtually zero. And then you have to consider that in addition to the smaller stories being told in each individual MCU movie, there's always an overarching plot that needs to connect and culminate in something like the Avengers. And by making Blade a rated R movie, they'd be alienating a huge chunk of their audience, pretty much everyone under 17, from knowing a bigger piece of that overarching story. And guys, Disney is never going to let that happen. I'm sorry. And now we need to talk about Deadpool again for a second, because as people keep pointing out online, Bob Iger did say there is room for an R-rated character like that under Disney's name. The thing people keep conveniently leaving out is the second part of the statement he made, which is that if they do go ahead and make a Deadpool style R-rated movie, it will be very clear that it's separate from the MCU and it'll come out as an R-rated feature. Like they will let everyone know that in advance. And unfortunately, since Marvel Studios is making Blade under the MCU banner for Phase 5, that's your signed, sealed, and delivered guarantee that it's going to be rated PG-13. But to be totally honest, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. When I was growing up, my parents were pretty liberal about what they let me watch in terms of R-rated and gory movies. I mean, at this point, I've probably talked about how young I was when I saw the original Halloween like 100 times, but there's no way my parents would have ever taken me to the theater to see something like Blade if it was rated R. Marvel movies are inarguably the biggest movies on the planet right now. They make more money than anything out there, and they also have the biggest budgets out there. And a PG-13 Blade from Marvel Studios means you're gonna get $100 million+ budget on this thing. It's gonna be an event, whereas something like Spawn over at Blumhouse is a $20 million movie that's gonna be kind of like an R-rated superhero parody. It's not gonna be anything crazy like Blade is gonna be under Marvel's banner. And guys, I know for older people like us, it's harder to have an open mind about this stuff because we've been screwed so many times as horror fans throughout the years, but by having a PG-13 Blade, we are introducing a new generation to the best genre out there, and that means it's going to keep going in the future. We might have to deal with the PG-13 Blade now, but there could be an R-rated one down the road because the kids who are going to see it are going to get into horror, they're going to start sneaking out to see R-rated movies, and then when they're our age, where we are now, they're going to want to see an R-rated Blade, and they're probably going to get it, and it's going to be fucking awesome. So I think we just kind of need to have an open mind about this stuff is what I'm saying. I completely understand if you're in the camp that can't wrap your mind around seeing a non-R-rated Blade movie, and for you, there's still Blade and Blade 2. We don't talk about Blade Trinity because it's a massive piece of shit, but you've got two awesome Blade movies you can watch whenever you want. And let's be real, if you're a massive Blade fan, the upcoming movie is not going to be anything new for you because it's an origin story. It might have a couple different beats, but it's going to be the Blade story you already know and love. Anyway guys, that's all I have for you on my first MCU video. If you want to see more, let me know down in the comments below, and let me know what you think of this entire situation. I'd love to do more videos like this. I love covering Halloween, but I gotta find some other stuff to talk about too so I don't get bored or run out of things to talk about. I hope you understand. So if you're new here, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed and hit the notification bell, and that's about it. So as always, my name is Jimmy Champane, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.